We're going to be presenting today the findings of our State of Collaboration Survey for 2012, and this is the survey results to date. We took a snapshot of the survey findings back on Friday of last week, and what we're going to be presenting today is what we compiled in terms of our findings from the survey to date. A little bit of background on the survey as we get started. So our objective of the survey was to do a benchmarking of the information development business and look at the current state of collaboration practices. We're looking at content contribution, content review and approval, and this is not only inside of the information development organization, but actually reaching out to end users and looking how end users using your content, your information that you develop, actually collaborate back with you and provide comment and feedback. So we're looking at user-generated content, social content features, and what we really wanted to understand were what are the common challenges and the common approaches, and what were the unmet needs in this business. We targeted this at information development organizations. So the way we gather participants is through our own mailing list that we maintain here at Jorsec Software. We communicated this through Twitter and other social media, and very heavily through LinkedIn groups. So the 123 or so people that responded are the sorts of people that you would expect to hang out around vendors, right? They're the DITA consultants, information development organizations, customers and prospective customers, and people that frequent LinkedIn and Facebook groups that are relevant to their business. So user assistants, technical writer, managing technical docs, all of the, I think there's about 20 LinkedIn groups that we communicated this over. The survey is still open. It's going to remain open through the 31st, and then we'll start a new survey for next year, and we'll run it over the course of the year. So this will be an evergreen survey where we're collecting data, and the goal is really here to provide benchmarking, to communicate that benchmarking out to the DITA community, and then to also understand how we can improve our products and share with other vendors how they can improve their products as well. So we haven't restricted access to the survey in any way. We're going to update this annually, and the goal here is to spot trends. So this year is the first year of benchmarking. Next year in the analysis, you'll see how things are shifting over time, and we'll discuss trends and emerging issues as we go forward. Now, I'm going to move rather quickly through the slides. There's a lot of content here. There's a lot of charts and graphs. Hopefully what we'll do is not bore you with charts and graphs, but actually pull out the insights that we got as we go through this presentation. So let's get started. First, we're going to go over who participated in the survey. What's the survey demographics? So the industries represented in the survey, and this is in the survey results right now. This is 102 organizations that are the participants that gave us their industry information. So again, we had over 100 people, 123 join. We had 102 that actually shared information about what industry they're in. And here's what we see. We see that information technology, software, and services rank high in the participants, high-tech manufacturing, publishing and education, and then we had a mix of others in other areas, and then you see the other sort of information-intensive organizations that participated in the survey. When we look at the individuals participating in the survey, one of the things that we got, oh, and I'm sorry, I'm hearing from somebody that they've got the volume all the way up and they can barely hear. If anybody else is having audio problems, please just let me know by posting something in the chat or posting something in the question. Looks like others are okay. Aaron, I'd suggest if you're dialed in with VoIP, try dialing into the access number that was included in the audio information, or if you're dialed in, just try dialing in again. But sometimes VoIP on GoToMeeting can be a little difficult to deal with, so sorry that you're having trouble. If we look at the participating individuals, you'll see that the majority of the people, the plurality of the people that responded were technical writers, information architects, and also just under 20% were TechPubs managers and just under 10% were consultants. And then there was a mix of other roles in the information development process. We asked organizations how much they publish, how many publications they create annually. And what we see is that 50% of the companies here release fewer than 50 publications annually. So they're not heavy, intense publishers in about half the sample, but in some cases you see over 11% create over 1,000 publications annually. So there's a real mix of organizations here, both large and small, participating in the survey. When we look at the deliverables that people create, we see the usual suspects: user guides, training manuals, web content, and so on. But we also see some emerging areas here, such as people creating marketing collaterals and sales collaterals in this process are also responding to the survey. We see social media content and catalogs and QA test scripts and requirements documents, especially requirements documents at 30%. Responding was a very interesting finding for this. That was one that we didn't expect to see. And so we can see that we're looking at documents here that aren't only classic technical publications, but are also reaching into other areas of the organization that are being represented in the people that took this survey. If we look at the formats that people publish to, no big surprise, 95% of people publish PDF, just about 2/3 HTML. But the thing that surprised us is even in this day of electronic media and social media, 40% of organizations that participated in this survey still print content. And that's going to drive the collaboration complexity up significantly. A lot of these organizations, as we'll see going forward, review PDFs and paginated content as part of their review process. So, keeping in mind that PDF and print are high output requirements, they're going to flavor the way people review content. We also see mobile, HTML5, and EPUB as being significantly represented here in terms of formats that organizations need to publish to. And we'll be sharing how many of our respondents actually supply data in each of these charts as we go through. Where do people manage their source content? A third of organizations participating still manage their content in file systems. So this could be, almost typically network file shares. So there's a lot of content out there that's not under content management, and we think that significantly impacts the ability to review and approve content in efficient ways. So content management has a lot to contribute when it comes to collaboration and review. One of the things we're not sharing today that we want to do some more analysis on is understand how use of content management, component content management, or even source code management systems for managing DITA content, for instance, how adoption of those technologies has alleviated some of the pain and challenge around content review. We'll show later how DITA and XML adoption has favorably impacted organizations' ability to effectively review content. Most of the organizations reporting to our survey are not localizing their content. 58% are not localizing. But when you do localize content, for those of you that do, you recognize that there are additional challenges to review and approval, particularly review and approval around localization proofs. So, localized targets and understanding not only the content that's out there that needs to be reviewed, the language content, but also the formatting and how that formatting changes as you go from language to language, and the run length of the words changes, the white space changes. So localization presents some unique challenges. We hope to explore some of those in next year's survey as we go forward. This year we wanted to get a sense of just how many organizations really are facing these challenges, and it looks like about about 40%. We wanted to gauge how many authors there were in organizations because we really wanted to understand if organization size made a difference in adoption of some of these technologies, particularly DITA and XML. We'll see a slide later when we talk about DITA adoption that shows that even small organizations are effectively using DITA or XML. But here's the spread of organizations that we saw in terms of how many authors, and you see that half have very small authoring organizations. And something on the order of 60% are smaller than 20. And somebody asked if the slides will be downloadable. Yes, we'll make the slides available to everybody that's registered for the webcast, even if you didn't attend. You'll receive a PDF copy of these slides in the mail. For anybody else in your organization, they'll be available for download if they register to download. And we'll have information at the end of the broadcast. We asked how many reviewers, approvers, or subject matter experts are in the organization, and these are the people you collaborate with. And while this slide in and of itself is interesting, the real interesting thing here is if we look at the ratio of reviewers to authors. How many reviewers per author do you have? And the thing that was rather startling to us was that about a quarter of the organizations have fewer than one reviewer per author, which means that they've got a very highly concentrated review and approval process that could probably be handled through workflow. But if we look at the other end of the extreme, 30% of the organizations, the ratio is greater than 5-to-1, which means collaboration is pretty far-reaching. If you've got 5 reviewers per author, even if you've got 10 authors in your organization, 5 reviewers, that's 50 reviewers that you've got to deal with on a regular basis. 50 cats you have to herd, as we heard in your verbatim comments in the survey. And one of the things too is that you see that a solid 11% have more than a 10-to-1 relationships. Between 10-to-1 exactly and more than 10-to-1, we're looking at something close to 20% of the organizations really have very far-flung needs for collaborating within their organization. Lots of people that you need to reach out to. So we looked at authoring practices during our survey, and about 40%, just under 42%, are using some mix of structured and unstructured authoring. A solid quarter are only using structured authoring. Now, structured authoring is either XML, some form of XML, including DITA, and we'll look at the standards that people are using in just a moment. Just to point out that this isn't strictly DITA organizations that we're reaching out to here at easyDITA. Participating in the survey, just under a third of those organizations are only using unstructured authoring. They might be looking at DITA and trying it out, but they report that they're only using unstructured authoring for creating the content that they publish. If we look at the tools that organizations use for unstructured authoring, again, no big surprise to anybody that's been around this line of work for a while. Word is pretty much ubiquitous in terms of its use and availability as a tool for authoring content, and that's going to influence how companies approach and think about collaboration. And we'll see those marked differences as we go through comparing organizations using DITA for a year or longer to the other organizations. FrameMaker, again, is a desktop publishing solution, is very high up the list, and the other Adobe products are all there. And then we see, the help authoring tools, the HAT tools represented, in the list lower down. And some of these charts, as with this one, you'll see that the responses add up to more than 100% because people were allowed to select multiple responses. Are we also covering crowdsourcing using Wikis, Jive, etc.? We talk about social media, and we talk about user-generated later on in the broadcast. So bear with us there, Ken, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Thanks for your question. So we look at DITA and XML adoption. In our survey, exactly 1/3 of the respondents are using DITA for 2 years or longer, and a total of 46% of the companies responding that provided us with information here have been using DITA for a year or longer. There's a good, close to half of the organizations that are using DITA for over a year. There are a number of organizations that are trying out DITA. They're either in pilots, they're exploring it, they're getting information, or they've gotten through their startup phase and they're just about ready to deploy DITA into production. But if we really look at this, we're looking at about 46% of companies using DITA in a production mode for over a year, and then everybody else, which is the way we're going to split the samples as we go forward. If we look at the standards that people use, of course, there's the 30% that use none, but DITA 1.2 is by far, whether with or without a specialization, the dominant standard. DocBook's still hanging in there at 11%. We actually see DocBook adoption in industries that have regulated workflows as being much higher. It's closer to 33%, and we'll talk about compliance and regulation later. But those organizations probably adopted XML technologies before DITA was available, which explains the high level of DocBook that we see out in these organizations that have either internal or external audit on their content review process. And DocBook was a good solution at the time for doing that, and still is working for a number of organizations. We look at the number of authors inside of organizations using DITA or XML for more than a year, right, which is just the sample we're looking at here. We see that, again, 48% of those responding. The mix here is very, very similar to the mix of organizations that we had responding to the overall survey. So for the half of organizations that are using DITA for over a year or XML for over a year, 48% of them have 1 to 5 authors. And this just proves the point. We had a discussion in a LinkedIn group recently about, are you too small for DITA? We saw a number of success stories out there of, armies of one information development groups using DITA very effectively, doing very effective content contribution, review, and approval, and very effective multi-channel publishing using DITA, even with as few as 1 information developers in the organization. Deliverables produced with DITA and XML. We had, again, this is the set of organizations only using DITA or XML. We had a good solid quarter of them developing all of their documentation. Everything that they produce is produced using DITA. We had, another quarter, sorry, of the organizations reporting that do greater than 75. So, just about half of the organizations do 3/4 to 100% of their authoring in DITA or XML if they've been using DITA or XML for over a year. So we see these aren't organizations that have been just using it off to the side for trial projects or pilots. They're actually doing full production and producing their deliverables using DITA or XML. And when we look at the number of authors in these organizations, the percentage of authors using DITA or XML, and this is in 76 organizations reporting. So here we're looking at the entire set of respondents. You can see 38% said none of their authors are using DITA, but 46% said that all of their authors are using DITA. And if we take out just the segment of those companies using DITA or XML for more than a year, 67% report that all of their authors are using DITA or XML. So again, DITA or XML adoption, when people go in, they're all in for the most part. They're producing the majority or all of their deliverables, and they have the majority or all of their authors using these tools. So that's the mix of people participating in the survey. Now we're turning our thoughts to the core of the survey: content contribution, review, and approval. How is it working today? Where are the challenges? How do you do it? So let's take a look at what people had to share with us. Our first question around this was around content contribution. This is broader than contribution. It's overall, how does SMEs give authors the information that they need to get started doing their content creation? So this could be technical writing in a high-tech organization, the majority of the organizations responding. This could be marketing writing. But we're really looking at here, how do people approach getting the information that they need, and how much content contribution is going on there. And what we see here is that note-taking, of course, interviews, note-taking, very widespread. Almost 3/4 of organizations do that. 2/3 of organizations give the author access to the product, whether that's hardware or software. So we saw this in high-tech manufacturing and information technology companies. Getting product information, specs, designs, other things out of the product, and we're getting a couple more people that have mentioned that they're losing audio from the computer speaker. We've provided a dial-in number for telephone. You should have 1-800 access. So if you're having computer audio problems, from GoToMeeting, please just dial in and use our toll-free number. So what we see here in terms of content contribution, we looked at a number of ways of doing that. Our SMEs authoring draft content, whether that's in unstructured formats like Word or email, or whether that's in structured formats, XML or DITA. And what we found is that in a lot of cases, that's going on, less of it with XML or DITA. We'll get into a detail behind that in just a second. But we're also looking at co-authoring. Our SMEs and DITA's co-authoring content in unstructured forms, Word or email, other unstructured document formats, including FrameMaker, or are they co-authoring content in DITA or XML, or are they, are SMEs authoring draft content? So we looked at all of these, but what really becomes interesting is, again, half of our organizations roughly that responded are using DITA or XML for more than a year. The other half aren't. So let's look at the differences between how those organizations do that. And the way we do this is it's called, technically it's a split sample analysis. Split sample analysis is just that. We take all of the respondents, we split them into two groups, and we compare how those two groups responded. So the first sample is organizations using DITA for a year or more as they reported to us in the survey, and we're going to show those in green on the charts going forward, labeling them as you see on the screen. And the other organizations are just other, and they're labeled in blue. Now, you need to note that these other organizations still are using DITA. They either haven't been using it for a year, they're trying it out, they've got pilots going on. So there's some DITA activity. So you'll see some responses that they use structured approaches, but they're very low. So it's not pure DITA yes or no. It's using DITA in production for more than a year or not. And remember that there's a mix of both structured and unstructured in all of these organizations, except for the 25% that said they're using pure DITA, or in the 33% that said they're using pure unstructured, right? So 42% use both. A real quick question from Ann asks, are the survey respondents in the United States or broader locations? We actually had international participation in the survey. It tended to look like our social media groups, so it's primarily U.S., Canada, some Central and South America, and a lot of Western Europe, and some very limited participation from Japan, Asia, and South Asia. So there's a mix of international participants here. Good point. I should have had a slide on the country mix, but we'll try to provide that information on our website and a blog post following this up. So thanks for the question, Ann. That's a good point. So how do SMEs provide input to authors? When we split this between the organizations using DITA or XML for more than a year, 46 of them, versus the other organizations, the 33 reporting, what we see is some really significant differences, and let's look at a couple of those. So if we look at the unstructured approaches for SMEs providing input, they're either co-authoring with the authors unstructured content, they're providing draft hard copy content, or they're providing draft unstructured content, say a Word document, or perhaps FrameMaker. What we see is that a lot more content contribution goes on with unstructured than in the structured groups. Now, the structured authoring groups are still getting unstructured. The organizations using DITA for more than a year are still getting input from SMEs in Word. They're still getting input from SMEs in hard copy, and they're still co-authoring unstructured documents with SMEs. They're just doing it significantly less than the organizations that haven't been using DITA for more than a year. But if we look at the contrast here, which is co-authoring in XML or DITA, what we see here is that there's virtually no difference between SMEs authoring draft content as XML or DITA. They both do it the same. But there's a 20% gap here. That 20% gap does not address the gap in the lower rates of content contribution. So what we are starting to see here is a pattern that there's less content contribution overall, and less co-authoring, and the organizations using DITA from XML for more than a year. And we think that this is because the tools are less accessible to the SMEs when you're in a DITA development world. And the content contributed in unstructured formats is less valuable to you because of the level of formatting that you need to do to get it into the publication. So you're getting information, but you're not getting content that you can clean up, reformat, and apply. There's a lot of reformatting that needs to happen. So we see an opportunity here for providing SMEs with better content contribution tools in DITA environments. If we look at how SMEs and others review review and comment on draft content, and as opposed to finished publications, we want to look at how people collect, review draft notes and comments. So PDF and using Acrobat review features, in particular, a lot of people don't know this, but Acrobat 10 has features for document review that allow you to compile changes from a number of users. You should all take a look at this if you haven't taken a look yet. But it's useful if you're using PDF-based review today and not having to consolidate those changes. But we see that PDF and email are dominant forms, and again, we allow people to respond in multiple ways here. So the totals are more than 100%. Virtual meetings, 40% say that they use virtual meetings to review documents live and make changes and approve as they're editing the document live in a virtual meeting. Others use Word documents and track changes. We see 38% use that. Hard copy, still hanging in there at 30% for hard copy, comment, and review. Just stunning in our day and age, but it's still going on. And then we see, other techniques, but here, DITA or XML tools to collect comments and changes, almost 18% out of the 78. But when we look at the split sample again, and organizations behave differently, a different pattern emerges. When we look at here, the key differences, so again, I'm going to obliterate other here in a second with a note point, but 26% of those organizations using DITA or XML for more than a year collect their changes in DITA or XML. So, right here, they use a DITA or XML tool to collect comments and changes. That's great. Impounding all of those comments and changes right into the information development process using the same tools, we think that's a best practice. Absolutely. We support that in our software. Our competitors support it in their software. We think it's absolutely a best practice, and we ought to see more of it. But here's where the real difference comes in, right? We look at using Word track changes to collect and review comments and propose changes. And those not using DITA for a year or more, right? 2/3 use Word track changes. There is no real replacement in the DITA world, in the XML world, for that capability. Vendors are working on it. We're working on it. But right now, that model of sending a document out, getting everybody's changes in it, and getting them back, there's no analog. We do it slightly differently in our products. For those of you that have seen them, we think it works. But if you grew up using Word track changes, you probably need to think a little differently about doing that in a DITA or XML world. And again, the gap here, that 44% gap in responding, is not addressed by the 20% improvement that we see using DITA or XML to collect comments, right? So again, the tools have not caught up, and or at least have not caught on to the level that the unstructured tools have supported these forms of collaboration. In all of the other areas, we really see that there's hardly significant differences, although lower uses in hard copy for organizations using DITA or XML for creating their content. The other ones are pretty much on par. So what's the format of content that people use for reviewing and approving before publishing a document? So now this isn't draft reviews. This is right before publishing. And we see, two primary approaches, either complete unstructured draft documents that are proofs. So something that's high fidelity to what the output document is going to look like. Pagination, headers, footers, table of contents, index, white space, all of the sort of pagination that you need in that final proof. Or something that's unstructured with red lines. Redlining, blacklining. Show me what changed. Show me what was inserted, what was deleted. I want to see change bars down the left margin. I need to know what changed since the last time this document was published. Very important use case in any kind of organization that has change control in place, whether for regulatory or internal audit purposes. But we also see a significant number of organizations that are saying they're just sending out DITA, just the components that changed, or just the portions of an unstructured document that changed, or even a DITA map built just for review purposes. We were really happy to see that 14% response. But again, obviously, there's going to be big differences in the rate at which people respond to these, depending upon whether they've been using DITA or XML for more than a year or not. What we're seeing is half of those using DITA for more than a year only review the content that changed. So that's half. That's You know, here, 13. That's the 13%. I'm sorry. That's the DITA map review is another 22%. So we're seeing 52% here. Send out only the stuff that changed. But hey, look at what's going on here. Even in the organizations that are not significantly using DITA for production, or they haven't been using it for a year, 18% of those that have been using DITA for less than a year responded that they're sending out only DITA components that change. We think that component-oriented review has a dramatic positive effect on the effectiveness and efficiency of the collaboration and review process, particularly around reviewing content right before publishing. And you're going to see this dramatically in the next slide when we look at what are the issues and challenges that organizations face. So one of the things here, you know, we look at what are the problems that people report, you know, review and approval delays publication. Reviewers don't respond in a timely fashion. Authors rekeying changes. Reviewers complaining that the process requires too much time or too much effort, or authors adjudicating changes, right? Figuring out, okay, Joe said this, Frank said that, Mary said this. I need to get Joe, Frank, and Mary together now to have a conversation about what this really ought to say, because they each made a comment in hard copy, or they each made a comment in email, or they each made a comment as a postie on a PDF that they had their own copy of. And now I've got to get all of these conflicting changes merged in. Very common problem. Almost half of organizations report that. And then, there's this other problem that's sort of down the list here, changes that are out of scope. This is, I sent you a document, I told you this is what I wanted you to review, and now you're reviewing and commenting on everything under the sun, not just the stuff that changed. That's a problem. But again, when we see organizations, and again, hidden under this box right here says other, please specify. When we see organizations that have been using DITA for a year or more, they report overall less pain. And now we're looking at this just in gross points. We're not looking at this in terms of proportional points. But I mean here, record keeping insufficient for regulatory purposes. Less than half the number of people report that pain when they're using DITA or XML. Gross points 12%. Reviewers and approvers not responding in a timely fashion, lower by 16%. Why? Probably because they've got less to review. They're reviewing components. They're reviewing just what changed. It's easier to respond in a timely fashion when you don't have to go through the whole book. So we think component-oriented review has positively impacted this. We think it's positively impacted, responding to things that are out of scope, because they don't get the things that are out of scope. They're just getting what changed. They're just getting what you need them to respond to, and what you need them to be, have a sense of urgency around. Taking too much time or effort. In organizations using DITA or XML for more than a year, I have to say the whole thing because that is the sample here. 18% lower response rate on that particular challenge than those not using DITA for more than a year. Review and approvals, cycle delays, and right on down the list. The only area that we see that is more pain reported, and not a lot, but 7% more, is this need to rekey changes. And this almost certainly has to do with the practice of sending PDFs out for review, getting post-it note type changes in PDFs, and then needing to bring them back into your authoring environment to key them in. Or other approaches, hard copy, email, other approaches that are offline to the DITA tool set. So we think component-oriented content, component-oriented review has had a very positive impact on review and approval approaches in terms of their effectiveness and efficiency, in terms of reducing the challenges. We think better tools around collaboration will drive this number down even lower, ideally in some cases to 0. That would be great, and that's one of our goals in life. Okay, we looked at compliance during our survey. And again, if you have any questions, we've been getting questions along the way. People are typing them into the question box. We're also watching the chat box. So if you have any questions along the way, just let us know, and then we'll have some discussion at the end. If we don't answer your question along the way, we'll get to it at the end. So audit and record keeping, we wanted to know, what do people need to track and the review and approval process. And you see here how they responded, and the response rates weren't different significantly between structured and unstructured organizations. So the two most important things are who reviewed it, who made the change, and who approved it. Date and time, who accepted or rejected changes, the time that they were accepted or rejected, much less important around time stamping and audit trail as who. Who is the most important thing? Who reviewed it, who changed it, who approved it. Font's a little low here, so I will read the slide for those of you on smaller devices. We looked at, is your content review and approval process subject to regulatory or internal audit? Only 29%, 29.5% said yes. And is your content review and approval process part of an internal business process like change management? Again, only roughly 25% said yes. And so basically what we see here is document review and approval, almost certainly part of quality. Quality assurance, making sure that the documentation is accurate and complete, comprehensive, and usable, effective. When we looked at those people that said that this segment right here, the 25% or so, or sorry, 30%, 29.5%. We looked at that segment, and we looked at which industries they were in. Surprise! They're not in industries that are any more regulated than the industries that we saw in the overall survey. So if we went back to our first slide, really showing what industry are they in, this slide looks almost identical. I think high-tech manufacturing moved up just a little bit here above information technology services. Education moved up a skosh. Aerospace and defense moved up a skosh. But pretty much the order and the proportionality of the people that are reporting that they're subject to some sort of internal or external audit looks like the organizations represented here. So roughly, that 25 to 30% is 25 to 30% of everything, everybody reporting. Updates, content revision. We wanted to look at here when documentation's been released, it's been published, it's out in the wild, users are using it, hopefully users are loving it, they're getting it done, but they find things that need to change, stuff that's missing, stuff that's wrong. How do you collaborate around that process? So we wanted to know, how do end users tell you that something needs to be updated or revised? Support desk tickets is the #1 by far method that's used for that. To us, this means that you need some level of integration between the support desk and the information development organization if they're the ones that are maintaining the information after it's released. We'd look at that in just a second too. Email to a centralized email address, again, that's content coming in either through tickets or through email or through feedback on a portal. All of that needs to be brought back into the information development process and made actionable. It needs to be put back into a context. If it was taken out of a context, what were they doing when they saw this problem? What page of the manual are they talking about? And it needs to be routed to an individual that can take action on it and make that change. We see, historically, information development tools haven't been integrated with those other tools. They haven't been integrated with support desk tickets. They haven't been integrated with feedback, customer feedback on portals and so on. But we are starting to see that integration. Tools like MindTouch do that now with authoring tools and integration back into XML and DITA, not just with our product, but with other DITA CMSs as well. Paper document change request forms are really on the slide. We expect that we'll see this as one area that pretty much goes away over the coming years as we get more and more people delivering live content. But you see the emerging areas here. The end users making changes directly on a wiki. 7% of the people in our survey said yes. That's probably about 5 or so out of the 75 here, and my math's a little rough this time of day. And proposing changes on the discussion page on a wiki, 5%. So here, over almost 12% are saying that they're using wikis to get customer input and change. So back to the question that was raised earlier about the the use of social media and wikis. We do see this. We see it rising. We've written about this and the issues around integrating this information in with your info dev process and the issues with curation. And we'll talk about this in a future webcast, but we think there are better ways of doing it, like using portals that allow you to integrate those comments right back into the information development workflow. And that's how we do it with our products. Updates and revision to deliverables. You know, how often do you do it? When do you do it? Well, so we saw this slide and we kind of chuckled and we said, you all have to look deep into your souls and your hearts and say, were you all honest when you answered this? Because never got zero. We know that there are documents that never get updated. Every organization's got documents that, for one reason or another, you know, there's a line you draw on the documents you maintain as part of sustaining the documents that are just out there. And usually there's some sort of knowledge management solution to fill in around those, or there's some sort of help desk to fill in around those to keep them up to date and current. But there's a lot of stuff that's out there that's scanned paper that I've seen in my lifetime that just never gets updated. But what we do see is that, you know, for the day forward or information that organizations are maintaining, that they, you know, they do it either, you know, as soon as they can or as soon as money and time allow. So, you know, we had some interesting write-in comments on the other that maybe we'll share if you guys are interested in. If we look at information development tools, who's responsible for maintaining the information after it's been out there for a year, right, or longer? Who collects this information? And the answer is 80% of the organizations said tech pubs, but there's a mix. Again, this is more, we allowed multiple responses here because many times multiple organizations do share maintenance of that information. But, you know, 80% of the time it's TechDoc. And do periodic updates get the same treatment as the original document did in terms of review, approval, workflow? Is your process the same for a revision as it is for a first out? And the answer is pretty much yes, and that 75% number that we see there and the yes is very consistent with the 80% of organizations reporting that information development and tech pubs are responsible for maintaining that information after it's been out. So they're using the same process. We think that's a best practice as well. We think having the organization do sustaining on their information is very important. It yields higher quality, higher effectiveness, better compliance around localization and other issues, and also it gives the organization information about what's relevant. And let's talk about that now in terms of social content. So we looked at, do organizations track their content if it's out on a portal? And you'll see that there's a little wedge here that says NA because they don't have the capability. We believe there's a mix of NA and no, and that no. So the people reporting yes, they track views of their content, and they have end user ratings. With 36%, 36.5% say that they track views. 20% say that they have users rating their content. Now we want to know, well, what do you do with it, right? And the good news is that, you know, if we look at, do your users rate your content? Thumbs up, star rating, whatever. 20.3%. Do you use it to identify content that needs improvement? 20.3%. So 100% of the people that said our end users rate content use that to identify ailing or problem content, right? Content that's not working for them. A smaller percentage, but still fairly high, use those user ratings to identify high value content. And this is content that you might want to promote on the portal. You might want to make it a best bet in your search engine. So there's, you know, high value content, you know, you want to get out in front of people. It's the stuff that they go to most often, probably contains the most usable, most relevant information that they've got. So we think for those, you know, 3 or 4% of you out there that didn't say yes to that, you should take a look at how you use ratings to identify your valuable content as well as your troubled content. Do end users contribute? We saw 18% roughly that said yes, they do via portal or wiki. They actually contribute content. They create it or they contribute it. Somebody asked a question about crowdsourcing content, and I'll read the remark. For when you get crowdsourcing discussion, trying to drive a large number of people to use DITA XML tools to facilitate input seems like a culture clash with social media. Not necessarily. There are tools out there, and we're a provider as well of tools that make it relatively accessible to use DITA and XML. You don't need to see angle brackets, right, to contribute content in DITA or XML. We make tools. Other organizations make tools that allow users to work in rich text views of that content. How well those tools integrate with the rest of your workflow, I think, is the critical point about which tools you should select. We see a problem, honestly, with contributing content via portal or wiki when you really want to curate that content. Sometimes you don't care; it's not that important. You let your users carry on the discussion. Certain communities around open source, there's high value of having the users contribute to the documentation and contribute content and take ownership over that content creation process. So crowdsourcing documentation for, say, an open source project makes a lot of sense. And more often than not, when you're talking about a corporate product and corporate IP, you want to curate what people are saying about the document, especially about the product, especially the documentation that you give people to help them use it or understand how to fix it. That information, we think needs to be brought into a curation process. So in the case here where we've got 18% that do have contributed content, user-generated content, if you will, how do they curate it? This is looking at all respondents here. So the 73, 82% said that they don't do it. When user-generated content happens, we see that these are the approaches that people use, and the plurality of organizations responding, half of them curate the content inside of the information development organization. So this is a primary method of doing it. We also see somebody that's a community manager, portal, wiki, community manager that's curating the content. But curation, either with somebody managing the community or sending it back to InfoDev and then publishing it out, is probably a better practice when you want to maintain control over the language, the branding, the quality, other things that are important to your organization goals. But in the cases where you really want to crowdsource, we see that there's 5% of these organizations are enabling the end user to make those changes themselves. Now, I'm getting on to probably the most interesting set of findings that we had was we gave you the chance to say things in your own words. And we asked the question, if there was one thing that you could do to improve collaboration in your organization, what would it be? So we took these are verbatim. These are except in cases where we made them a little shorter or filled in a piece of missing information where we show things in square brackets or we'll put an ellipsis in. These are quotes. And so we're showing you what was said in quotes and who said it. So what's the one thing you could do in the area of process, things that people would change in their internal process. In product lifecycle, the key thing here was bringing information development closer to product development and having better communication around new products, what's changing, how the changes affects the documentation, and getting clearer specs from subject matter experts, actually controlling the vocabulary that they use when they create specs and their contributed content, getting documentation in a format that's able to be ingested in the TechPub process. Here, preventing customer engineering from being a roadblock and getting information about customer goals and needs. In this particular case, I'm assuming customer engineering is early in product development, but that could be in this organization, I'm not sure, support, the equivalent of support in other organizations. But getting that visibility and line of sight to the end user. What do they need? What do they use? What's valuable? Delivering your documentation live is a good way of doing that, but not every organization can do that. We understand that. A lot of organizations, semiconductor companies, defense companies, they've got intellectual property that they can't put out in the public. They need to control things. Review. We heard this over and over and over again. More timely responses from SMEs. Training SMEs on collaboration techniques, and this is one from a TechPub's manager. Convincing reviewers that modular documentation actually means not having to review the entire book, we saw that that is probably the one thing that contributed to the improvement and the reduction in the pain and the reduction in the challenges, the reporting on the challenges around content review and approval was component content. I think, as we're looking at our own products, we're trying to understand ways of giving that subject matter expert the context that they need, right, without the heavy burden of formatting, and with an emphasis on, focusing their attention on what you need them to do while they've got the document, giving them the rest of it for context, but really focusing them in on what you need them to review, because that's what changed. And I think that balance is important. You get into that problem of, the out of scope. We call it open season. You give them the whole book, and they're going to get out their highlighter and go through the whole book, even though you just wanted them to look at the new stuff. On the, back in the processed area, end user involvement, getting customer feedback. Both tech writers and managers alike want to know how customers are using those documents, what's valuable. And then here on the support side, having better coordination with project support. The customer-facing business units in your organization, support, project support, customer engineering, field service. You want input from those folks about what customers need. But again, understanding how your documents are being used is critical to the process. Another area that people said if they could change one thing, if they could do one thing, what would it be? Common tools. Simple DITA editors that anybody can use. And the goal here is getting everybody on the same tool set, right? Same tools for creating, reviewing, and managing content. We saw, even in organizations using DITA for a year or more, that they're still getting unstructured documents back for review. They're still using PDF. They're still getting email and hard copy. Not as much as the organizations that haven't been using DITA for a year or longer, but they're still getting a lot of that in. So we're seeing multiple platforms being used for content creation, review, and management, and getting everybody into that one house is important. Some people actually jump to XML and DITA as the solution. Everybody on the same tooling process, more collaboration, everybody having viewable. And if you make the tools, simple enough to use, here they're saying developers could draft procedures and QA could write test plans in DITA rather than unstructured. That's how we do it here in our organization. We're a software organization. We've moved to a documentation-first approach. We write very simple, stripped-down DITA tasks as part of our product designs. And as the features get built and iterated and elaborated, that documentation gets elaborated. When the UIs get frozen, the screen captures are made, and we publish the documentation and the product at the same time. We're in a continuous integration world. We're beyond agile. We roll features onto our servers on a regular basis, and we found that documentation last was not working for us, so we switched our own process to doc first. And we all use, the developers and the documentation team all use the same tools here. When we look at some other areas of tools, review, simultaneous review. Everybody's seen the changes in one place. There are tools out there that do that. PDF does that now. If you're using Acrobat 10, you can do that. You still have the problem of getting those changes back into the information development process. Automated technical review application. What do people want? They want to make the review process manageable. They want to know, Larry's always the last guy to respond on this document. He's always the last one, and we want to be able to nudge Larry. We want to tell Larry, look, every single one is, you're the guy holding up the wagon. You're the guy holding up the product launch. But we want to collect data around those. We want past due alerts. We want process management for review. We want to see, comments in line displayed next to the content, right? Like in PDF and like in easyDITA. We do that ourselves right now in the tool that's in the product today. But not every tool gives you the capability of seeing those review comments in context. The ability to archive the results of the review so that people can view it. Now, this particular DITA consultant responded said to the general public, but I think there are really good cases for saying, you need an audit trail. You need to make that audit trail visible outside of your tools. You need to be able to export it into things like SAP that you use for managing your quality process. And these are capabilities that we're looking at right now and that we're building into our tools, and hopefully our competitors are doing that too. So you all have a good selection of tools that improve the way you do collaboration. Make document draft review and final a more automated and easy to track process. I think that sums it up pretty nicely. So as we go through, I know we're getting close to the hour. As we look at end user involvement, people want to get end users a way to give direct input to the content, to distribute the content in a web-based way, and capture the best of social media in terms of interacting with those documents. So our conclusions. We found, as you saw, that there are really significant differences in how people collaborate and how many challenges they have around collaboration and review between organizations that have been using DITA for more than a year and everybody else. So we see, we showed you that there was less apparent direct content contribution from SMEs. SMEs writing less and contributing less written content into the process. Higher reliance on interviews and organizations using DITA for more than a year. Less unstructured input, less of everything. And more structured input, but not enough to close that gap. And we think that that's because SMEs don't have access to easy-to-use tools. And that's a problem that we've been working to solve since we've been in business, and we're going to continue to work to address those issues. We think that we've got a lot to say about that, and we hope that you take a look at our products. Most organizations don't appear to have found a suitable replacement for that's in the DITA XML space that gives them what they had with word-based collaboration. Now, we've got other presentations out on SlideShare that we gave a couple of years ago. I gave a presentation at DITA North America about, what do we really need with collaboration tools, and we talk at length about when you're using Word, what are you really doing? We think there's a lot going on in that. We've kind of unpacked that, but we don't see organizations going to the same level of use of DITA or XML tools that they had with Word when they were working in unstructured. We see PDF review still widespread. It's lower in organizations that have been using DITA for a while, but it's still important. And it's important because of change bars. It's important because of pagination and proof review. But overall, largely due to component level review and use of DITA maps for review, scoped review, we're seeing that organizations using DITA and XML component approaches have lower pain overall in this process, as we showed you. Everybody needs better tools for collaborating in DITA and XML to give them the kind of capabilities that they had for ubiquitous access for SMEs to use these tools without a license, ideally without a software download, web-based tools that they can use on multiple platforms. And those are things absolutely that we're working to address in our business.